Hi witches, I'm Blair Bathory, and this is the Something Scary podcast. Thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first time, or you're one of the brave souls who join us every week. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed our live from last week when I was in Burkittsville, and I showed you the shooting locations of the Blair Witch Project and was joined by Kelsey Davies. If you enjoyed that and you want to see more videos and live events from me, leave me a comment and let me know. In honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, we're excited to delve into some chilling tales where ancient folklore and urban legends intertwine. From La Llorona's chilling wails to the sinister Cadejo beast, these stories reflect the deep cultural connections and lasting superstitions of Latin America. For some, the tales passed down through generations are just old stories, but those who are wise understand the warnings of darkness lurking in the stories that refuse to fade. First, life or death isn't always black and white, followed by a secret past that haunts you. Finally, in our last story, a most dangerous hunt. Before we get to this week's stories, I wanted to ask if you would take a minute to share this podcast with someone you know who loves horror or is looking for something to get them in the mood for spooky season. We know that there are millions of podcasts out there and that the biggest influence on what people listen to is what their friends recommend. Thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful for all of our fans that continue to listen from around the world. So, want to hear something scary? La Llorona's Last Cry, and other Hispanic legends. Sometimes we get lucky and escape a horrible fate, but sometimes when evil grips you, there is no hope. Like in this story inspired by Giselle. Last summer, as I do every year, I went to visit my grandma in El Salvador. She had grown up in the countryside, and we always spent a week with her in her home. I loved the peace there, the fresh breeze, the animals, and the silence that wrapped around the house like a warm blanket. One evening, as my grandmother and I were settling in with coffee to watch our novella, I realized we were out of bread. The nearest bakery was half an hour away, so I decided to grab a moto taxi and head out before it was too late. It was almost 7, and the sun had already started to dip below the horizon. When I reached the bakery, the moto taxi driver paused before driving away and gave me a strange look. "Be careful getting home late," he said. "The Cadejo comes out at night." I rolled my eyes. The Cadejo legend was well known in El Salvador. Our ancestors believed dogs helped guide souls to the afterlife. There were 2 kinds of Cadejos, the black one, who brought evil and darkness, and the white one who brought light and protected the good. "Thanks," I replied sarcastically. "I'll be careful." I chuckled the entire time I was in the store. The idea that people believed that legend was real was wild to me. With bread in hand, I stood outside waiting for another moto taxi to go home, but none came. The road was empty. Suddenly, I noticed the evening air felt heavier than usual. The sun was long gone, and the sky had turned an unsettling shade of black. Without a ride, I had no choice but to walk home. The path was familiar. I had walked it many times with my grandmother, but that night felt endless. Each step seemed to stretch the distance, and after what felt like hours, I checked my phone. It was already 9:45. My stomach tightened. I wasn't lost, but something wasn't right. The uphill road ahead should have been a relief since my grandma's house sat on the other side of the hill, but an eerie silence settled around me as I climbed. Not a single animal stirred. I stopped, scanning my surroundings. The trees, the grass, everything was still. Too still. Then, out of nowhere, a loud howl pierced the air. So close, it was as if a dog were right beside me. I jumped, heart racing, and looked around, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows. The howl came again, softer, but still bone-chilling. My hands trembled. The words of the elders echoed in my mind. When you hear a howl close by, run. The Cadejo is near. If you hear it far away, pray, because it's already closer than you think. Panic surged through me, and tears blurred my vision. My thoughts went to my grandmother, how worried she must have been. Gathering every ounce of strength, I ran. The faster I ran, the heavier my legs became, like my pockets had been filled with stones. The howling continued, farther now but still too close for comfort. Then suddenly, I felt something behind me. A growl. Claws scraping my back. I fell hard to the ground. When I turned, a massive black dog stood over me, its eyes blazing like fire. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Frozen in terror, I could only stare as the beast approached, snarling, ready to strike. I managed to roll to the side just as its teeth sank into my arm. Pain shot through me, my arm burning as blood soaked the ground. I tried to fight it off, hitting and kicking, but the black Cadejo was relentless. It tore into my legs, my face. Every inch of me felt like it was being ripped apart. I cried out, but my voice felt small in the night. Darkness crept in, and I begged God to keep my grandmother safe. Just as I was about to give up, another howl rang out, this one different, clearer. I forced my eyes open. A white dog, its eyes like crystal, appeared out of the shadows, growling at the black Cadejo. The black dog turned and lunged at the white one, and they clashed in a whirlwind of fur and teeth. In the chaos, I pushed myself to my feet and stumbled forward, desperate to escape. But before I could get far, the black Cadejo knocked me down again. I braced for another attack, but the white dog was there, standing between me and the black one, baring its teeth in a fierce snarl. Through the fog of pain, I heard my grandmother's voice calling my name. My heart lurched as the black Cadejo turned toward her voice and bolted in her direction. "No!" I screamed, forcing my battered body to chase after it. Up ahead, I saw the faint outline of my grandmother. The black dog was gaining on her. I ran faster than I thought possible and with all my strength, leapt at the Cadejo. Grabbing it around the waist, it crashed to the ground, but its strength was overwhelming. It slipped from my grasp, ready to charge again. Before it could, the white Cadejo returned. Biting and clawing at the black one, they fought viciously, and just when I thought the black Cadejo might win, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. I turned to see my grandmother kneeling beside me. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Menina, I'm so glad you're safe," she said, pulling me into a hug. The dogs," I stammered, glancing back at the battle. But there was only silence now, and in the distance, I saw the white Cadejo disappear into the darkness, its crystal eyes gleaming one last time before it was gone. Later that night, after being treated at the hospital, I told our neighbor what had happened. She listened quietly, nodding as I described the Cadejo. When I finished, she spoke softly. "The black Cadejo doesn't just come for those who are immoral. Sometimes he seeks out even the purest souls, wanting to claim them as his own. But the white Cadejo, he watches over the good-hearted. He saved you." I tried to let that sink in, but with a deep sigh, I was just grateful to be alive. Have you ever been in a life-threatening situation, but it felt like there was divine intervention to keep you safe? Did something mystical come to your aid? Tell us your frightening story by emailing us at somethingscary@snarled.com. No matter how far you run, the past can always find you and take its sweet revenge. Like in this story, inspired by Gabriella Elizabeth. Diego, a software engineer with an eye on the future, had never been one of myths and folklore. His world was grounded in the here and now, until it wasn't. Diego and his wife, Mariana, had recently moved to a sleek apartment complex on the outskirts of Medellin, Colombia, with a view of the river that snaked its way around Medellin's edge. Their life seemed perfect, but that feeling didn't last long. Over the past few months, Mariana had grown distant. Once vibrant and full of life, she now seemed hollow, always glued to her phone and finding excuses to be out at night, saying she was working late or having dinner with friends. At first, Diego chalked it up to her new job at the nearby tech company, but soon, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something else was going on. Nights became difficult for Diego. He would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations and moments where her behavior seemed unusual. He started dreaming of the waterfront at night, of voices calling his name, of shadows lurking just beyond his view. He hadn't mentioned these dreams to anyone, not even his best friend Andreas. But one evening, over a beer, Diego finally confided in Andreas. "She's not the same anymore, man. She's distant, secretive. I've had these weird dreams. I don't know. I feel like I'm losing her." Andreas gave him a careful look, then told him he wasn't going to say anything. But there were rumors going around about her boss, Pablo Morales. Diego's stomach tightened. Morales was the slick CEO of Mariana's company, always suave and recently single after a messy divorce. Regrettably, Diego knew him. There's talk around town. People have seen him with a woman who looks a lot like Mariana at the strip of bars along the waterfront. Could be nothing, but then again. Andreas trailed off, taking a sip of his drink. Diego's pulse quickened. The river, the place from his dreams. It was just a coincidence. It had to be. That night, Diego couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with doubt and anger. His dreams returned, more vivid than ever. In the darkness of his subconscious, he saw a woman standing by the river, her figure barely visible in the fog. She limped as she walked, her one leg twisted unnaturally. In the distance, he heard a soft cry, broken, haunting. "Diego," it called, as if from the edge of his consciousness. The next morning, Diego was more than just tired. He was unraveling. His paranoia grew as the days passed. Mariana's excuses to stay late at work became more frequent. Her polished look, her sudden urge to be out of the house. It all felt like part of some larger betrayal. His fear and anger bubbled under the surface. He couldn't help but think about La Mutilda, an old urban legend whispered among the locals. It was said that she was a woman who had been betrayed by her lover, mutilated and left for dead by the river. Her ghost now wandered the city, seeking revenge on unfaithful men. She would lure them with her beauty, then reveal her true, horrific form before dragging them into the water. Diego dismissed it as nonsense until the night he followed Mariana. He told her he had a late work event and wouldn't be home until morning. She nodded, vaguely acknowledging she heard him. Diego slipped out of the apartment after her, moving silently along the dark streets. By the time he reached the riverbank, Mariana was already there, wrapped in the arms of Pablo Morales. Diego's heart sank as he watched them kiss, the truth too painful to bear. That night, he returned home in silence. The image of them together played in his mind, like a twisted dream he couldn't escape. He barely slept, staring at the river outside their window, hearing the faint, hollow cry from his dreams echoing in his ears. Diego. The following night, Diego set his plan in motion. He lied to Mariana again, telling her he wouldn't be home until the next day. But this time, he didn't follow her. He waited. His fury simmered beneath the surface, growing with each passing second. At midnight, he heard the door creak open. Mariana tiptoed into the apartment, careful not to wake him. Diego's voice cut through the silence. "Where were you?" She froze, turning slowly, her face pale with guilt, unable to provide any answer. Diego, stepping out from the shadows, a machete gleaming in his hand. At that moment, everything came into focus. The betrayal, the sleepless nights, the whispers of La Mutilda. It all collided inside him. His anger, once restrained, exploded in a violent frenzy. Mariana tried to flee, but Diego's rage made him move faster. He slashed at her leg, and she collapsed, screaming in pain. When the police arrived, alerted by the neighbors, they found Diego sitting on the couch, staring blankly at Mariana's lifeless body, the machete still clutched in his hand. Years passed. Diego served his sentence in silence, haunted by his crime and the twisted dreams that never left him. He tried to repent and become a better man. When he was finally released, he moved far from the city and changed his name, hoping to escape the past. Eventually, he fell in love and married a woman with whom he had 2 children. But like anyone's past, it will catch up to you. Even in the remote town on the edge of a thick forest, the rumors followed him. People spoke of a woman limping through the woods at night, crying out for her lost love. They called her La Mutilda. Diego tried to dismiss the stories, but the fear gnawed at him. His nights were plagued by the same dreams, the river, the cry, the twisted figure in the fog. One night, his daughter woke him, shaking with fear. "Papa, there's a woman outside," she whispered. Diego's heart pounded as he went to the window. At first, he saw nothing but the swaying trees, but then, faintly from the edge of the forest, he heard it, a soft, hollow cry. "Diego." His blood ran cold. The voice was familiar, twisted, broken. He knew it was her. The wind rustled through the trees, and in the distance, he saw her, a shadow limping toward him, her figure barely visible in the moonlight. The cold air bit at his skin, and his heart thudded in his chest. "La Mutilda," he whispered. The reality crashed down on him. She had found him, and this time, she wouldn't leave without revenge. Do you believe your past actions will always find a way to catch up with you? Or do you believe in a chance for redemption? What do you think she did to him? Most memories of loved ones are comforting, but sometimes you'll be dying to forget the past. Like in this story inspired by Solar 496. I still can't shake the horror of what happened that night. Over 20 years ago, I was a wallflower at school, someone who faded into the background. Nobody seemed to notice me, and over time, I found myself drawn to the few others like me. I ended up in a perfect friend group of 4, Miggs, Carlos, Guy, and me. We weren't superstitious, but we loved ghost hunting. It was a way to escape, to feel like we had some kind of power over our invisible status. But one night, everything changed, and I swore off ghost hunts forever. I wish this were made up, I really do. But as crazy as this sounds, I believe we encountered La Llorona. We all grew up hearing the urban legend, but never thought much of it. She's the spirit of a beautiful woman who, after being betrayed by her husband, drowned her children in a fit of rage. Overcome with grief, she drowned herself afterward. It's said that she wanders the riverbanks of Mexico, eternally searching for her lost children. If you're an adult and encounter her, bad luck and misfortune will follow. If you're a child, she'll pull you into the river to drown you, just like she did to her own children. It was a Saturday night, and per usual, we weren't invited to any parties or anything like that, so my friends and I rode our bikes all around looking for ghosts. We ended up stopping to take a break, over by a riverbank, when we heard a strange sound, like crying, but very distant. It wasn't moving closer though. which only made us more curious. Carlos was always the first to volunteer when something weird happened, and this time was no different. He began to lead the charge toward the noise down the side of the river. As we made our way through the trees and underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be doing this. But Carlos, he lived for this. Finally, we reached a small clearing along the edge. Through the tangle of roots and weeds, we saw something. White. It was kneeling at the riverbank. My heart started racing, not out of fear, but out of excitement. For once, it seemed like we found something real. We could become more than just a group of nobodies. Maybe we'd be famous. "Hold on," Guy said, always the rational one. "It's probably just a trick of the moonlight." None of us wanted that to be true. We wanted to find something, have some excitement. I wasn't willing to give up hope. We walked closer, and I was the furthest back. And as we approached, we saw it more clearly, or rather, she, a woman in white, kneeling by the river. She was weeping, her head bowing with each sob. It seemed like nothing more than a sad young woman. We heard of La Llorona, but that's not the first thing that comes to mind when you're witnessing something in real life. We had no idea how much danger we were truly in. Miggs, always the sensitive one, took a few steps closer. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked, his soft voice concerned. Then she moved. Slowly, she stood, still facing the water. When she finally turned toward us, we froze. Her eyes were blood red, glowing with an unnatural light. Her skin was so pale, she practically glowed in the dark. It looked like it hadn't seen the sun in years. She was obviously tall, but the way she stood up on her toes made her seem taller. Mist, which came off the river, began to swirl around her. It turned into a dark smoke curling off her body, swirling around her like tendrils. Her long black hair writhed and twisted as if blown by a powerful wind, and her dress whipped violently from side to side. But there was no breeze, no wind. The air was still and heavy, feeling like it was weighing me down. Miggs didn't even have time to react. She let out a guttural scream, angry, hateful, and lunged at him. Her long, pale fingers dug into his shoulders, her nails cutting into his skin. In one fluid motion, she hurled him into the river. It happened so fast, he didn't even make a sound. For a moment, we all stood there. We didn't seem to believe what we'd just seen. But then rage took over. Carlos grabbed a stick, and without thinking, he charged at her. "Let him go!" he shouted, swinging the stick wildly. The stick connected with her side, but instead of stopping, she seemed to absorb the blow like it was nothing. She barely even flinched. Slowly, she turned her gaze to him, her blood-red eyes looking into Carlos with intensity. A sinister smile spread across her face, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I wanted to help. I wanted to move, but my body wouldn't obey. It was like my feet were cemented to the ground, fear gripping every muscle in my body. Guy was frozen too, standing motionless beside me, his face pale as death. With another ear-piercing shriek, La Llorona lunged at Carlos. She moved with unnatural speed, her hand wrapping around his throat like a vice. He struggled, choking, as she lifted him off the ground with ease. For a moment, he fought, thrashing, kicking, but it was useless. She dragged him, as though he weighed nothing. Toward the river's edge, before either of us could react, she plunged him beneath the dark, murky water. "No!" I screamed, finally finding my voice, but it was too late. Carlos's flailing limbs were the last thing I saw before the river swallowed him whole, leaving only ripples on the surface. Guy and I stood there, paralyzed by shock. Two of our friends were gone, snatched away in moments. It was like some horrible nightmare. I wanted to wake up. I wanted it to end. La Llorona turned her gaze toward us then, her glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. She stepped forward, her movements slow, deliberate. Each step she took seemed to suck the very life from the air around us. The once heavy stillness now felt suffocating. "We need to go," Guy shouted, grabbing my arm, snapping me out of my stupor. He pulled me away from the river and we ran harder and faster than we ever had in our lives. But even as we ran, I could feel her presence behind us, closing in, her wails echoing in the night. We didn't stop until we reached the road, our bikes still where we left them. Gasping for air, we jumped on and pedaled, not looking back. During the police investigation, Guy and I didn't tell the truth. What good would it do? They were gone and there was nothing anyone could do about it. So we just said that Carlos and Miggs weren't with us. We never spoke about the night again. We avoided each other in the halls, our friendship broken beyond repair by the terror we'd witnessed. The guilt, though, that stayed with me. I couldn't shake it. Every time I thought of Carlos and Miggs, I felt the weight of their deaths pressing down on my chest. But the thing about guilt is that it doesn't go away, and neither does she. It's been over 20 years now, and I thought I had finally outrun the past, until recently. 2 weeks ago, I started hearing it again. Late at night, just outside my window, the crying. It's faint, almost like a whisper on the wind, but I know what it is. I know she's found me. After all these years, La Llorona is still searching, still grieving, and this time, I don't think I can run. The nightmares have returned, the same ones from back then, but now I see their faces, Miggs and Carlos, their eyes wide with terror, their hands reaching out from beneath the water, their mouths open, but no sound escaping. They're calling for me. They need me to save them. But I can't. I never could. And now, as I sit here writing this, I can hear her again, louder this time, closer. The sobbing, the wails. I'm not sure how much longer I have. Maybe tonight's the night she takes me too. Maybe. I deserve it. Have you ever been in a difficult situation where the guilt was worse than what originally happened? Did anyone get hurt? How did you overcome it? This week's podcast stories were edited by Sarah Lukasiewicz, narration by Blair Bathory, audio edited and mixed by Fitz Harris, additional audio editing by Calvin Linderman, produced by Ana Villalobos, executive produced by Gail Gilman, music by Sapphire Sindalo and Calvin Linderman.